Story 1, the odometer that counts backward. The numbers were going the wrong way. Robert Hayes noticed it somewhere around mile marker 94 on I-80 westbound through Wyoming, when the digital odometer on his Peterbilt 579 ticked from 247,332 to 247,331. He blinked, rubbed his eyes with the back of a knuckle thick with road grime, looked again. 247,330. The number dropped again, and again. Steady as a heartbeat, certain as death, the odometer was counting backward, and Robert felt something cold slide through his chest that had nothing to do with the February air howling outside at -11. He'd been hauling refrigerated medical equipment from Chicago to Sacramento, a route he'd run 47 times in 6 years. He knew I-80 the way some men know their wives, every curve, every bad stretch of pavement near Elko, every treacherous pass through the Sierras. This was not a road that surprised Robert Hayes. He was a man who did not rattle easily. He'd survived a rollover in Colorado in 2019, talked a suicidal motorist down off an overpass ramp in Nebraska, and once driven 11 hours through a Montana whiteout that killed 4 other drivers. He was not a man who spooked. But 247,329. 247,328. The fuel gauge was fine. The engine temperature was fine. His load temperature, the reefer unit humming steadily in the trailer behind him, showed a solid 34 degrees Fahrenheit, exactly where it needed to be for the transplant organs packed in the climate-controlled containers he was hauling. Livers, kidneys, a heart, real cargo. The kind where being late didn't mean a penalty fee. It meant someone died on an operating table in Reno waiting for the only viable match they'd ever find. Robert grabbed his CB radio. Any eastbound, you got a copy on the westbound Peterbilt at mile marker 94 on I-80. Come back. A static, then a voice low and wrong like someone speaking through a mouthful of wet gravel. Mile marker 94 westbound. Yes, we see you, Robert. He hadn't given his name on the channel. His right hand found the CB again. Who's on this channel? Identify yourself. The silence, then after 11 seconds he counted by instinct the same voice. You should check your mirror, Robert, the left one. His eyes went to the mirror before his brain could refuse. The left exterior mirror showed the lane behind him, empty, and beyond that the flat black of the Wyoming plain, and beyond that the smear of stars above the horizon. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that should make his stomach drop and his bowels go liquid. Except the highway behind him was gone. Not obscured by darkness, not hidden by a curve, simply gone. The lane lines ended 20 feet behind his rear trailer axle, and beyond that point there was nothing. Not darkness, not road, not earth, just absence. A vertical wall of nothing, as though someone had cut the world off with a straight edge and the cut was moving, keeping pace with him, eating the road behind him as he drove. The odometer read 247,198 now. It was accelerating. Robert's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. The Peterbilt's engine sang up through its registers, the Jake brake disengaged, and the rig surged forward, doing 73 in a 65 zone, and none of that mattered because the wall of nothing in his mirror was keeping perfect pace. He could see the leading edge of it now, that boundary where road became absence, and it was precise and clean and utterly wrong, like looking at a photograph with a section torn away. He keyed his Qualcomm satellite unit, the fleet management system that let his dispatcher track his location and send messages. He typed with one hand, eyes forward, something wrong with truck. Need help. Location I-80WINEAR-MM94. The unit responded immediately. Robert Hayes departed Chicago February 14 th. Estimated arrival Sacramento February 16 th. Current location, Chicago IL. He stared at that for 3 full seconds. He'd left Chicago 2 days ago. He was in Wyoming. He could see the Laramie Range against the sky on his right. His GPS confirmed Wyoming. The Qualcomm said Chicago. 247,001. The odometer was dropping faster now, numbers blurring, and Robert understood with a horrible, chest-compressing certainty that he was running out of something. Not fuel. Not time exactly, something else. Something he didn't have a word for. As he thought about the cargo, the heart had a 4 to 6 hour viability window outside a body. The paperwork in his cab said this heart had been harvested at 11:14 a.m. He'd left the pickup facility at 12:30 p.m. His watch currently read 2:47 a.m., which meant 14 hours had elapsed, which meant the heart in his trailer was long dead, had been dead for 8 hours, was a rotting piece of muscle in a cooler, worthless. And the man in Reno who needed it was either also dead or still waiting, still hoping, still believing that somewhere on I-80 a truck was burning through the night carrying the piece of him he needed to survive. Robert Hayes had failed him, but he couldn't remember failing. He remembered driving correctly, hauling the load correctly, watching the time correctly. He remembered all of it being fines. 246,500. The numbers were falling like a fever, breaking wrong, breaking upward, temperature climbing when it should crash, and Robert gripped the wheel and pressed the accelerator to the floor. And the Peterbilt screamed and the trailer swayed. 60 tons of machine begging for mercy on a Wyoming highway at 3 in the morning. The CB crackled, that wrong, wet gravel voice again. The third time is always worse than the second. You already know that, somewhere you know that. What third time? Robert heard himself say, and his voice sounded used, scraped hollow. This run, you've made this run before, Robert. Not 47 times, 49. You just don't remember the last 2 because they ended here at this mile marker when the odometer hit 0 and you had to begin again. Fresh, cleaned, not knowing. 244,000 now, falling in chunks. That's impossible, Robert said. Oh, the heart in your trailer. Check the timestamp on the paperwork again. He didn't want to. He grabbed the clipboard from the passenger seat without taking his eyes off the road, felt for the paperwork by touch, tilted it toward the instrument panel glow. The harvest timestamp was 11:14 a.m. The date field read February 14th, 2023. His watch said February 16th. His phone, when he grabbed it from the cup holder, said February 14th, 2:47 a.m. He hadn't left Chicago yet. He was still in bed in his apartment in Joliet, alarm set for 6, coffee maker prepped, ready for another run. 240,000. When the odometer hits 0, the voice on the CB said almost gently, the run resets. You won't feel it, you'll just be in Chicago, in bed, February 14th, fresh. You'll go to the pickup facility, you'll load the cargo, you'll drive west. And somewhere around mile marker 94, the odometer will start going backward and you won't know why and you'll be afraid again, clean afraid like you were the first time. How do I stop it? Robert's voice cracked on the last word. He was ashamed of how young it made him sound. How do I get past mile marker 94? Long silence. Then you have to deliver the cargo on time. The cargo has to arrive viable. It's never arrived viable. It's been 14 hours since harvest. The heart is dead. Yes, it's always dead by the time you figure that out. You keep losing time somewhere between Chicago and Wyoming, and you don't know where, and neither do we. Robert looked at the nothing following him in his mirrors. The 235,000. Accelerating now, dropping hundreds per second, and he could feel something changing in the air of the cab, a pressure shift, a thinning, as though reality were a gas slowly venting from a seal that was failing. He thought about the man in Reno. He thought about him every run he realized. He could picture the man's face, though he'd never seen it, a composite of every patient face he'd ever passed in hospital hallways, waiting, always waiting, middle-aged, frightened, trusting that the system worked, trusting that somewhere on the American interstate system, a driver was keeping faith with him. Robert Hayes had kept faith 49 times and failed 49 times, and would keep faith again in 4 minutes when the odometer hit 0 and scrubbed him clean and sent him back to Joliet. He thought, if I could just find where I'm losing the time, if I could find that gap, that hole in the run, I could close it, deliver on time, break this. To 200,000, the numbers were a waterfall now. He grabbed the CB. Where am I losing the time between Chicago and here? Where? The voice, when it came, was quiet. We don't know. We've been trying to figure that out. We're watching your route on every loop, and we see you leave, and we see you arrive at mile marker 94, and the hours between are a black gap we can't see into. Something in that gap is consuming the time. We were hoping you could tell us. Who are you? The voice didn't answer that. Instead, you have 90 seconds before 0, I'm sorry. We'll see you again in 48 hours from your perspective, though it will have been longer from ours. Robert Hayes saw the odometer read 47, and he felt a sound build in his throat that he didn't recognize as his own. And the nothing behind him surged forward in his mirror, and the Wyoming stars went out one at a time, and he woke up in Joliet, February 14th, 6 a.m. alarm screaming. He knew with the kind of bone-deep certainty that bypasses thought entirely. He grabbed his phone and called his dispatcher before he was fully sitting up, called and said, I can't take the Chicago-Sacramento run. I need you to find another driver. His dispatcher told him no other driver was available. The cargo was time-sensitive. He was already contracted. Robert Hayes closed his eyes. Though. Tati about mile marker 94. As he got up, he made his coffee. He drove to the pickup facility. He loaded the cargo. He has never told anyone about this because no one would believe him, and because the 53rd loop finally broke something behind his eyes that he can't quite repair. And because somewhere on I-80 in Wyoming, between mile markers 80 and 94, there is a place where time folds back on itself like a wound that won't close, and a man drives through it again and again and again, and the heart in his trailer grows colder with each pass, and the man in Reno is still waiting, has always been waiting. Will wait forever on the other side of a run that can never be completed. Robert still drives I-80. He has to. He just can't find another job anymore. The dispatcher always calls. The cargo is always waiting. And somewhere always the odometer is ticking the wrong direction, patient as the dark, counting down to the moment it all starts over. And there is nothing in Wyoming, not the wind or the stars or the long, flat logic of the plains, that has ever been able to tell him why. Story 2, The Wait Station AT Exit 0. Patricia Sullivan had already passed the way station once when it appeared in her headlights for the second time. And she knew it hadn't been there on her first pass because she'd been watching for it for 6 miles, and the road had been perfectly empty and dark. Now there it was, the inspection facility at what the sign above the entrance read as Exit 0, glowing white and institutional against the Arkansas midnight, and the red light above the scale lane was lit, which meant pull in, and Patricia Sullivan, who had been driving 18-wheelers since she was 26 years old and had kept her record completely clean for 11 years, always stopped for red lights. She pulled in at 2:17 a.m. March 3, 2024. The thing that struck her first was how clean it was. Not normal facility clean, where the fluorescent lights hum over worn linoleum and the inspectors look like they've been awake since the Clinton administration. This facility gleamed, every surface white and unblemished. The scale lane itself looked freshly painted. The building beyond the scale was larger than any way station she'd ever seen, 3 stories at least, with windows that were lit but showed nothing inside them, just a flat, even, sourceless glow. She pulled onto the scale platform and stopped, killed the engine at the inspector's signal. The inspector who approached her window was wrong in a way that took Patricia 3 seconds to name. Too precise, that was it. His uniform was pressed to a geometric perfection that human hands couldn't achieve. His face was symmetrical in a way that faces aren't, the left side a perfect mirror of the right, which sounds attractive until you see it in person, at which point it registers as a malfunction. His eyes were the same shade of gray as the scale platform. Not metaphorically, the exact same Pantone precise gray. Patricia Sullivan, he said, not a question. That's me. She handed him her logbook and registration. He didn't take them. Your load manifest reads machine parts, hydraulic components, 41,000 pounds. Oh, that's correct. It isn't. He held eye contact. Your load is reading 47,688 pounds. You are overweight by 6,688 pounds. Patricia felt a spike of alarm. She ran legal. Always. Her trailer had been loaded at the facility in Memphis and sealed, and she'd weighed out legal at the Memphis facility scale before leaving. That's not possible. I weighed out at 41,000 flat in Memphis 6 hours ago. Loads change, the inspector said. The sealed loads don't change, the seal is intact. The trailer hasn't been opened. Loads change, he said again, and there was something in his repetition of the phrase that was worse than if he'd said something new. He directed her to the inspection bay. She had no legal choice but to comply. The inspection bay was around the back of the facility, and as she drove around the building, she realized 2 things. There were no other trucks in this facility, and the exit ramp back to I-40 was no longer visible from any angle. She craned her neck at every window. The ramp was gone. The highway was gone. Around this facility, there was nothing but flat dark, as though it existed in a void of its own. The 3 more inspectors met her at the bay doors. Same uniform precision, same uncanny symmetry of face. They directed her to shut down and exit the vehicle, which she did, dropping from the cab to the oil-stained concrete, and immediately felt the strange acoustic property of the space. Sound was wrong here, her footsteps landing flat and without echo in a room that should have echoed. Well, we'll need to inspect the cargo, the first inspector said. The seal has been noted. He produced a tool, not a standard seal cut. Or something longer with a head she didn't recognize, and approached the rear of her trailer. You need a reason to break a sealed load, Patricia said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. Federal regulation, you need documented cause. The inspector stopped, turned to look at her with those gray coin eyes. The overweight is the cause. 6,688 pounds. Do you know what weighs 6,688 pounds? I know. We've been trying to determine that for quite some time. He broke the seal. The trailer doors swung open, and Patricia Sullivan looked into the space that should have held stacked crates of hydraulic parts, and what she saw instead made her lungs forget their job for 4 full seconds. The crates were there. The manifested cargo was there, stacked and strapped exactly as she'd received it. But behind the cargo in the back third of the trailer, there was something else. A mass. Dark and dense and large enough that she understood immediately how it accounted for the 6,000 additional pounds. It was pressed against the trailer walls as though it had swelled into the available space. It was the color of the inside of a wound. And it was moving, not obviously, not dramatically, but with the slow, tidal rhythm of something breathing. It boarded the trailer in Memphis, the inspector said. At the facility, before you left, we've been tracking it for 3 weeks. What is it? Patricia's voice dropped to a whisper. That's what we're trying to determine. He gestured to his colleagues who were producing instruments that Patricia couldn't name. This is the fourth carrier. The previous three, he paused. The previous 3 carriers reported different symptoms. One reported his mirrors showing him scenery from locations he'd never visited. One reported hearing conversations in his sleeper cab, specific, detailed conversations in languages he didn't speak, that turned out, when we had them translated, to be accurate transcriptions of conversations that had not yet occurred. The third reported nothing at all, because by the time we intercepted her vehicle, she was no longer capable of reporting. I'm leaving, Patricia said. She said it calmly with the absolute clarity of decision. I'm getting in my truck and leaving. Oh, the exit ramp. I'll find it. The exit ramp, the inspector said, becomes accessible when the inspection is complete. The inspection is complete when we have characterized the cargo. We've been at this facility for a while, we're very thorough. And the cargo is, he glanced back at the mass in her trailer, which had shifted slightly, a long, slow line toward the open doors, toward the light and air outside. The cargo is resistant to characterization. Patricia Sullivan had 11 years of clean record because she made good decisions. She was standing in a way station that appeared from nowhere, staffed by people whose faces didn't work correctly, with something in her trailer that she'd been unknowingly carrying for 6 hours. And the exit was conditional on a process she didn't understand, run by people, if they were people who had been here a while trying to categorize it. She decided the most dangerous thing she could do was be passive. "Well, what do you need from me to complete the inspection?" she asked. The inspectors exchanged a look, a rapid, complex look that carried more information than a look should. "We need a witness statement. We need you to describe in precise detail what you observe when you look directly at the cargo for a sustained period. Our own observations have been compromised. Extended exposure affects our perceptual accuracy." Patricia looked at the mass in her trailer. "Extended exposure. How long have you been exposed?" she asked. Silence, then the first inspector said, "We arrived here on October 11th, 2023. 5 months ago. They'd been in this facility for 5 months with that thing, and it had compromised their perceptual accuracy, which she interpreted as a euphemism for something worse than that. Their coin-gray eyes and their perfect faces and their precise uniforms, maybe that wasn't how they'd arrived. Maybe the extended exposure had made them this way, regularized them, symmetricalized them, made them precise and empty and wrong. As she walked toward the cargo, she made herself do it. She walked to the edge of the trailer and looked directly at the mass sustained the way they'd asked. Up close, it was less like a mass and more like a compression, as though the space it occupied was being folded, the air and light around it bending inward like a drain. It had surface texture that her eyes kept refusing to process, kept resetting from, the way an eye slides off ambiguous optical illusions. And deep within it, she could see, or believed she could see, shapes, defined shapes, recognizable ones. Human hands pressed flat against the inside of the compression like hands against a window pane. A dozen of them, 2 dozen. As she stepped back fast, her heel caught the trailer lip. She grabbed the door handle. "Oh, the exit ramp," she said. "Is it accessible now?" "Oh, your observation period is over." She looked at the inspector. "There are hands in it, human hands, that's my statement, write it down." As she climbed back into her cab, she started the engine. She drove forward and found, with desperate relief, the exit ramp exactly where it should have been, as though it had always been there, I-40 East stretching out ahead of her in the pre-dawn dark. She called the police from the next rest area, gave them the location. "Exit 0 on I-40 westbound," she said. "There is no exit 0 on I-40, the dispatcher told her. Exit numbering on I-40 in Arkansas begins at exit 1. Patricia Sullivan drove to Memphis. She parked the truck at the facility and got out and didn't drive again for 4 months. When she finally went back to her truck, she found the logbook entry for that night, her own handwriting, her own route notation, but the time stamps showed a 6-hour gap between Memphis and her next recorded position, a gap she knew she'd been driving through but couldn't account for, and the cargo seal on the trailer was intact, unbroken, as though no one had ever opened it. She found one other thing. On the interior surface of the trailer, in the back third, there were marks on the aluminum walls. Long, parallel striations at shoulder height, uniform spacing, running the full width of the trailer back. The kind of marks you'd make if you pressed your hands against a surface and dragged them slowly across. Dozens of pairs, and they faced inward. Like something inside the trailer, not the inspectors outside, had been trying to get out. Story 3: What the radio station knew. Marcus Chen was 112 miles from the nearest town when the radio station began broadcasting his thoughts. He caught it by accident, scanning through static on a night run up US-93 through Nevada on February 22, 2023, 3 months into his first long-haul job. He'd settled on a country station out of Ely, which was fading fast as he drove north into the basin and range emptiness. And as the signal broke apart, he scanned up the dial and caught, at 106.7, a voice in mid-sentence. The way the dashboard lights make the interior glow orange, like a lantern, like he's piloting some kind of capsule through deep space. Marcus's hand froze on the scan button. Because he'd been thinking exactly that, not approximately that, not something similar. He'd been thinking those precise words, capsule, deep space, the orange lantern quality of the dash glow, as a private interior observation, a small piece of road poetry he'd been composing in his head for the last 20 miles to keep himself awake. He turned up the volume. The voice was mid-range, male, unhurried with the cadenced rhythm of a broadcaster born to the job. And the high beams are cutting maybe 200 feet into the dark, which means he's making decisions 200 feet at a time, and the dark closes behind him as fast as he makes it. And there's something peaceful about that, even though there shouldn't be. Still his thoughts verbatim on the radio. Marcus Chen had grown up in San Jose, engineering household, pragmatic, physics major college dropout, a man whose worldview had no filing system for impossible things. So his first response was a reasonable one. Someone was in the truck with him. Someone had been listening and was broadcasting. He checked every compartment. He got out at the roadside and checked the exterior. He was alone. He got back in. He's checking under the seats now, the voice said, and then laughed. A genuine radio laugh, warm and unprofessional, the laugh of someone surprised by their own material. And now he's back in the cab and he's breathing fast and he's trying to find the rational explanation, which is always the first thing people try. Who are you? Marcus said out loud to the radio. A pause, then the voice said, "That's interesting, he's talking to me now. Most of them don't talk to me this early. Usually they drive another 40, 50 miles before they say anything." Most of them, Marcus repeated. There have been others. On this stretch of 93, yes, maybe 8, 10 over the years, people who catch the station. What is this station? There's nothing licensed at 106.7 in this area. I would have seen it on a list. You would have, the voice agreed. I'm not on the list. What are you? A broadcaster, just a broadcaster. I've been broadcasting on this frequency for, well, a long time. The signal only propagates under specific atmospheric conditions, specific geography. You have to be on this road northbound on certain nights. Most truckers don't catch it. You had your scanner running. And you can hear my thoughts. I can. Broadcast your thoughts. There's a distinction. I'm not hearing them in any way you'd recognize as hearing. It's more like the signal passes through you and picks up what's there, the way radio waves pass through walls and pick up interference from electronics inside. You're generating a signal, everyone does. This stretch of road happens to amplify it. I just broadcast what's there. Marcus found he was gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2 with his entire strength, which was cutting off circulation to his fingers. He loosened his grip deliberately. Can you hear everything? Everything I'm thinking. I can broadcast what's transmittable. Not all thoughts are transmittable. The surface ones are, the ones that are language adjacent. The deeper material, the stuff that doesn't have words yet, the stuff that's more sensation or image that comes through differently. As texture, as tone, there's something in you right now that doesn't have words. Has been there for a while, I'd guess. Heavy, low frequency. He knew exactly what the voice meant. He hadn't told anyone. He hadn't told his mother or his sister or the dispatcher who'd hired him and seemed to actually like him. He'd told no one about the diagnosis. 6 weeks ago, the specific, cold, life-rearranging words from a doctor in San Jose who'd looked at him with professional compassion and said words that Marcus had been carrying alone across the American desert for 3 months, driving as though speed and distance were a treatment plan. "Oh, don't," Marcus said. "I'm not going to broadcast that," the voice said, and it was quieter now. "I never broadcast the things that don't have words. That's not what I'm for." What are you for?" Long pause, wind on the Nevada plain, vast and indifferent. "I'm not sure. I've been doing this a long time and I haven't decided yet. Maybe I'm just a broadcaster and there doesn't have to be a reason. Maybe the act of transmission is the reason. Making the interior exterior. making the private signal public even if the public is just one trucker on a dark road who happens to have his scanner running. As if you're broadcasting on an open frequency, anyone with a radio in range could hear my thoughts. Oh yes. Marcus looked at the dark in every direction. No other vehicles, no lights. The nearest populated anything was, by his GPS, 67 miles away. Is there anyone else in range? Oh, not at this moment. But there could be. On certain nights, yes, there have been convergences, multiple drivers in range simultaneously. The overlay of signals is, I won't describe it. It upset me the first time it happened, and I've been doing this long enough that very few things upset me. A semi appeared in his mirrors northbound, approaching fast. Marcus checked the frequency, 106.7, still clear signal. Oh, that truck, Marcus said. Is he in range? The broadcaster was quiet for 4 seconds. Oh, the broadcaster said, and there was something in his voice that Marcus didn't want to interpret. Oh, this is one of those nights. Is he in range? Are you broadcasting him too? Oh, he's in range. Can he hear us right now? Is he listening to this station? He has a radio. Marcus watched the truck in his mirror. A Kenworth T680, running lights bright, moving fast, maybe 15 over the limit, closing the gap. What is he thinking? The broadcaster said nothing for a long moment. Don't ask me that, the broadcaster finally said. Tell me. You don't want to know what the person behind you is thinking, Marcus. The way he said the name, like he'd been saying it for years, like it was worn smooth from use. And the way he'd said don't want to know, not in the hedging, diplomatic way of someone softening bad news, but in the flat, specific way of someone who had weighed the information and determined it was genuinely unbearable. Though the Kenworth was close now, 300 feet, 200, it wasn't slowing. Oh, he's not going to pass me, Marcus said. I know. Oh, he knows I'm here. Oh, yes. Oh, what is he? He's thinking about you specifically, Marcus, and I'm not going to broadcast what he's thinking because it would. The broadcaster stopped. Pull over, right now. Find an emergency pullout and get off the road. Marcus Chen trusted the voice of a radio station that shouldn't exist on a frequency that wasn't licensed, broadcasting from a location no one had ever mapped. Because the voice had proven itself capable of reading the interior of his mind and had done so without cruelty. And in that moment, it was the closest thing to honesty he'd encountered since San Jose. He pulled off onto the gravel emergency shoulder. The Kenworth blew past him at 104 miles per hour, close enough that the pressure wave rocked Marcus's van and the slipstream screamed past the windows. And for one frozen second as the truck passed, he could see the driver, could see him clearly in the cab light, a man who was staring directly at Marcus's pulled-over vehicle with a fixed intensity that had nothing casual in it. Then the Kenworth was gone north into the dark. Thank you, Marcus said. Well, the broadcaster said nothing. What was he going to do? I told you I wasn't going to broadcast that. Tell me anyway. Static, the signal was degrading. The atmospheric conditions were changing, the propagation window closing, the way all signals eventually fade. I want you to know, the broadcaster said through increasing static, that the thing you're carrying, the thing without words, I've picked it up in people before over the years, many people, and the frequency of it, the weight of it, it's different for different people. In you it has a particular, I want to say harmonic, something in it that is not only sad. Something that is still. The static swallowed the rest. Marcus turned the dial up and down, found nothing at 106.7 but white noise. He drove to the next town, parked in a gas station lot and sat for an hour in the dark, listening to the static on 106.7 until it became indistinguishable from the sound of his own breathing. The Kenworth was found 6 days later in a ravine 30 miles north. The driver was inside. The investigators couldn't fully explain the condition of the cab, not the damage pattern, not the burns, not what had happened to the driver's eyes. Marcus Chen called his mother from that gas station parking lot in Nevada at 4 in the morning. She was asleep and he woke her and she wasn't angry. He told her about the diagnosis. She was silent for a while and then said she'd fly out to wherever he was, any airport, and they'd figure it out together. He'd left 106.7 on the whole drive to the airport, just static the entire way. But once approaching a certain stretch of US 93 southbound, he thought he heard very faint, almost subsumed by white noise, a voice, saying something he couldn't quite make out, in the patient, unhurried tone of someone who has been broadcasting for a long time and intends to keep broadcasting long after the last signal fades. He doesn't drive that road anymore. Some days he almost wants to. Story 4, the last rest stop on Highway 62. The rest stop wasn't on any map that Delilah Okafor had ever consulted, which was not by itself alarming. She'd used plenty of facilities that lagged in their map database updates. What alarmed her was the sign, not the standard green highway department placard, but something hand-lettered on weathered wood. TRAVELERS rest final services before destination. And in smaller letters beneath it, you have been expected. She almost didn't pull in. She'd been driving TX62 through the Big Bend Desert for 4 hours since her last fuel stop, and the tank was fine, and she had water, and her next scheduled stop was 70 miles north in Fort Stockton, and she could make it. Except that she needed to use the bathroom and had for the last 40 miles. And the desert was vast and perfectly flat and perfectly dark in every direction. And the rest stop was right there with its warm interior lights and its promise of plumbing. She pulled in, 11:58 p.m. November 7th, 2023. The facility was larger inside than she'd expected from the exterior. She'd done that math before, the quick architectural assessment that told you a building was 1,200 square feet from the outside and now somehow felt twice that. The floors were clean saltillo tile. The lighting was warm incandescent, not the fluorescent torture of typical rest stops. There was a water fountain and a vending machine and a bulletin board. 3 truckers were already inside. The first, a heavy-set man in a red flannel shirt, was sitting on a bench reading a paperback. He looked up when Delilah entered and gave the neutral nod of road acquaintance. The second, a woman about Delilah's age in a Schneider trucking jacket, was at the vending machine with her back turned. The third was at the bulletin board, studying it with unusual concentration, a lean man in his 60s with a gray beard and the specific stillness of someone doing careful inventory. Delilah used the restroom, clean, functional, inexplicably pleasant for a desert rest stop. She washed her hands and looked at herself in the mirror and noticed she looked tired in a deeper way than physical fatigue hollowed, like a few hours of sleep wouldn't fix it. She'd been running hard for 3 weeks. Christmas load season. You run hard because the money is there and then you crash in January and you're grateful. She got a coffee from the machine, sad. The man with the gray beard turned from the bulletin board. "You should read this," he said. "Not aggressive, not friendly, informational." The bulletin board was covered in notices, but not the standard Lost Dog and local events mix. Every notice was the same size, the same format, and each one had a name and a date and a short text block. She leaned in to read the nearest one. JROME ADDLMAN, OCTOB. GR3RD 2019. I-10 eastbound. Jerome had been a trucker. The text was in first person. He described a drive in precise detail, the load, the route, the weather, the time of night. He described stopping at a rest stop that wasn't on any map. He described the warm lights and the Saltillo tile. He described the bulletin board. He described reading notices exactly like this one. Well, he described never leaving. Delilah stepped back. Her coffee went cold in her hand. She read another notice. Different name, different date, same structure. A woman who'd stopped here in 2021. Same facility, same lights, same board. She'd added her notice and sat down to wait and was still waiting when she wrote the note, and she didn't know what she was waiting for, but she could feel something coming and it would be here soon. Delilah counted the notices, 31. She turned to the man with the gray beard. "What is this place?" "I've been here since March," he said, gave no year. "March," she repeated. "It was November. You've been here since March." "I think so. Time is strange here. It might have been longer." She looked at the man in the flannel shirt. "You." 7 months, he said. He said it with the equanimity of someone who'd finished grieving and arrived at a flat plain beyond it. "I stopped for a bathroom break. I couldn't find the exit after that. I've walked the perimeter. The parking lot ends and then there's the desert, and I've walked into the desert and somehow I end up back in the parking lot." "The woman in the Schneider jacket," Delilah said, and looked over at the vending machine. The woman was gone. Delilah walked fast to the front door and pushed through it into the parking lot. Her truck was there. 3 other trucks were there. She could see TX62 from here, could see the road surface, could see the lane markings. She walked toward it. The exit ramp curved away from her no matter how she approached it. She walked in a straight line toward the road and found herself approaching the building from the rear. She tried again. The same. The building anchored some geometry that made straight lines curve back, like the surface of a sphere, like she was on the inside of something curved so vast the curvature was almost invisible. So she went back inside. The man with the gray beard was writing on a fresh sheet of paper, preparing his notice. "The woman in the Schneider jacket," Delilah said. "Where did she go?" "Oh, she left," the man said. "The hell? Sometimes people leave. We haven't been able to figure out the pattern." He capped his pen. "Jerome, he left after 4 months, just walked to the exit ramp and it let him go. Nobody was more surprised than Jerome. He'd stopped trying by then." "So it does let people out." "Occasionally, we can't determine why or when. There doesn't seem to be a condition to meet. It's not a puzzle, it just sometimes lets you go." Delilah Acaffer was the kind of person who solved problems by moving. She went back to the bulletin board and read every notice. She was looking for a pattern, for a variable, for the one detail that differed between the people who left and the people who remained. 31 accounts. She read them all. It took hours. The quality of light in the facility didn't change, no cycle of day and night, just the steady, warm, incandescent glow. "Oh, she found something." It wasn't obvious. She had to build a list mentally and then compare the departure stories against the staying stories. People who'd left had all described, somewhere in their accounts, a specific detail. They'd eaten something at the facility before leaving. Vending machine food, anything from the machine. People who remained had either not eaten or had eaten and still remained, which meant eating was necessary but not sufficient. She went to the vending machine. She fed in $2. She bought crackers. The gray-bearded man watched her eat them. "I've eaten from that machine," he said. "I know," she said, "but I don't think that's the only condition. I think you have to eat and also," she thought about it, about the accounts, about who left. "I think you have to leave without deciding to leave. Everyone who stayed has described trying to leave, running for the exit, demanding the exit. Jerome left when he'd stopped trying. The Schneider woman, in her account from 3 months ago, she wrote that she'd finally accepted she wasn't going anywhere, that she was at peace with staying. She finished the crackers. She put the wrapper in the trash. She sat down on the bench and picked up the paperback the flannel-shirted man had left face down, and she read it. She had no idea what time it was. She read for what felt like an hour. She did not think about the exit. When she looked up, something had changed in the air of the room. A quality of pressure different, like the moment before weather turns. She put the book down. She stood up slowly, not with urgency, just with the motion of someone who'd been sitting and was ready to stand. She walked to the front door. She walked to the exit ramp. She was on TX62 before she understood she'd made it, and she kept walking forward fast in case whatever geometry governed the place decided to reverse itself. And she walked until her boots hit real pavement, and the desert opened up around her with that vast specific silence of the Trans-Picos at night. And her truck was behind her in the parking lot, so she had to go back for it. She went back for her truck very carefully, moving with the deliberateness of someone diffusing something, not thinking about leaving, thinking only about the truck, the keys, the engine. She got in. She started it. She drove forward. She was on TX62. She kept driving. She didn't call her dispatcher for 6 hours, until she'd put 200 miles between herself and the rest stop. She pulled over then and called and said she'd stopped for a rest and lost track of time. Her dispatcher told her she'd been off the grid for 19 hours. She'd experienced maybe 4. There were 15 hours she couldn't account for. She filed her logbook as best she could. She's driven TX62 twice since, and the rest stop isn't there anymore, which is either a relief or something worse. Because if it's not there, the 30 people who were still inside it when she left are somewhere she can no longer find, and the board has 31 notices now, but soon it will have 32. And the man with the gray beard will have run out of things to read and will have started to study the arithmetic of who lives and who doesn't, and he will find the same pattern Delilah found. And he will eat crackers and sit and wait, and it will not work for him. She knows this. She doesn't know why she knows it, but she does. Some knowledge arrives after certain experiences with the certainty of grief, requiring no proof, asking for no confirmation. The 32 notices will become 33, and then 34. And the lights will stay warm, and the tile will stay clean, and the vending machine will always have crackers. Story 5, the hitchhiker who remembered everything. The woman had been dead for 6 hours when she knocked on Thomas Vega's driver's side window at a rest area off I-70 in western Kansas. And he knew she'd been dead because he'd hit her with his truck 6 hours earlier. And he'd stopped and called 911 and waited for the state police and given his statement and been cleared black ice. She'd stepped from the shoulder directly into his lane, 0 visibility, 0 time, and he'd watched the ambulance take her. And now it was 6 hours later, and here she was, knocking on his window in the parking lot where he'd stopped to sleep. standing in the cone of his exterior courtesy light with her hair still wet from the January sleet, and her face intact in a way that it hadn't been when the ambulance took her. Thomas Vega was 51 years old. He'd driven 2 million miles across this country. He'd seen accidents, fatalities, rollover victims, the full catalog of what interstate highways do to human bodies. He'd hit a deer in Montana that came through his windshield and killed it 6 inches from his face, and he'd pulled himself together and driven to the next town with safety glass in his hair. He was not a man who fell apart. He opened the window 4 inches. "I'm not here to blame you," she said. Her voice was right. It sounded like a living person's voice, present and specific and unremarkable. "It wasn't your fault. I know that. I'm not here for that reason." What reason are you here for?" "I remember everything," she said. "That's the problem. I remember everything I was supposed to forget." He didn't open the window further. He studied her face. It was intact, no injuries, no visible damage. Late 40s, gray hair cut short, wearing a canvas jacket over a wool sweater. The clothes she'd been wearing when he hit her, though he'd only seen them in his headlights for a fraction of a second before impact, and somehow he remembered them perfectly. "Oh, you were supposed to forget something," he said. "Everyone's supposed to forget when they cross. The memories are supposed to go. That's the mechanism. It's a mercy, not a punishment. You stop carrying all of it, the weight of every specific thing you ever experienced. Because humans carry it all, Thomas, every conversation and every face and every sensation compressed and compressed over a lifetime. The crossing is supposed to decompress it, let it disperse. Leave you with just essence without the weight of specifics." But you remember." "I remember everything." She said it without drama, and that was what made it devastating. "I remember being 7 years old and scraping my knee on a specific piece of sidewalk in Cincinnati, and the exact quality of the summer afternoon that day, the sound of my mother's voice calling me in, the smell of whatever she'd been cooking. I remember every conversation I ever had, including the embarrassing ones, including the ones that ended relationships, including the ones where I said the wrong thing at the worst possible moment and knew it immediately and couldn't unsay it. I remember every person I've disappointed, every opportunity I let pass, every version of my life I chose not to live." She was quiet for a moment. "I remember my daughter's face at her wedding," she said. "The specific way she looked at her husband in the moment before the ceremony began, when she thought no one was watching her and I was watching her, and she looked settled. Like a person who'd found the exact coordinates where she was supposed to be. I remember that with perfect fidelity, Thomas. I remember the color of the light and the sound of the room and the smell of the flowers. And I can't give it up. The crossing mechanism didn't work because I can't release it. I won't. I don't want to be without it." Thomas Vega understood something then. He understood it the way you understand certain things on night roads alone, wordlessly, in the gut. "Oh, you knocked on my window," he said. "You chose this truck. You're the last person who saw me, the last person who had contact with me. In the living world, you're the thread still attached. And if I's what do you need from me?" "I need you to remember me," she said. "Specifically, the way I remember things. I need one living person to carry a specific memory of me, and then I think I can let the rest go. I think the release mechanism requires something to hold onto on the living side, an anchor, a point of continuation." Thomas Vega had been driving for 8 hours and had a delivery due in Denver in the morning, and there was a dead woman standing outside his truck window asking him to carry her memory. And tell me something specific, he said. Something I can hold on to. She thought not long. My name is Carol Anastasia Weir. I was born in Cincinnati in 1976. I like the smell of rain on hot pavement more than almost anything. I had a dog named Biscuit when I was 12 who got old and had to be put down, and I held her while the vet did it because I didn't want her to be alone, and it was the hardest thing I'd done at that point in my life, and it made me a slightly better person. My daughter is named Jessamine Weir. She kept my name, which is the right choice, and I told her so. She teaches 6th grade in Lawrence, Kansas. She is good at her job. She is settled. She has the right coordinates. Oh, she stopped. That's enough, she said, if you can hold that. I can hold that, Thomas Vega said. Carol Anastasia Weir nodded. She took a breath that he could see, chest expanding, the human gesture so familiar it was surreal. Tell Jessamine, she started. She teaches 6th grade in Lawrence, he said. I know where Lawrence is. Carol Weir looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't read, and didn't try to. Then she wasn't there. Not gone in a flash or a fade or any cinematic way, just between one blink and the next, simply and completely absent. The parking lot light shone on empty pavement. The sleet had stopped. The Kansas plains were silent in every direction. Thomas Vega drove to Denver. He made his delivery. He slept for 8 hours in a motel on Federal Boulevard. He woke up and the first thing he thought of was Carol Anastasia Weir and Biscuit and the smell of rain on hot pavement and Jessamine who kept her mother's name because it was the right choice. He drove to Lawrence, Kansas 3 weeks later. He'd looked up the school. There was only one middle school in the district. He sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes trying to decide if this was rational and concluded it was not, and went in anyway and asked for Jessamine Weir at the front desk, and waited in the office with the fluorescent lights and the motivational posters while someone went to get her. She was in her mid-20s. She looked, Thomas thought, like someone who had found the right coordinates. He told her about the accident. He told her about Carol Anastasia Weir knocking on his window afterward. He had expected her to be frightened or skeptical or to call for help. She looked at him steadily while he talked, a teacher's measured attention, and when he finished she said, "The dog's name was Biscuit." "Oh yes," he said. Jessamine Weir looked at the wall of her mother's classroom, and Thomas looked too. At the children's work pinned up everywhere, their 6th grade sentences and drawings and science diagrams, and the room smelled like chalk and old books and whatever she'd microwaved for lunch. "Oh, she was worried about me," Jessamine said, not a question. "Oh, she said you were settled," Thomas said. "She said you had the right coordinates. She said it more than once, and I think that was what she needed to say." Jessamine sat with that for a moment. She was very quiet, and Thomas Vega let the quiet be. "Oh, thank you," she said finally, "for stopping F. Or coming here." He drove I-70 back west that night. The accident site was marked with the standard Highway Department reference post, nothing more. He drove past it at legal speed, eyes forward, and said out loud in the empty cab, "I'm still holding it, Carol." He's said it every time he passes that stretch of I-70 since. He doesn't know if she can hear him. He doesn't know if she's still carrying those decades of specific weight, or if Lawrence and Jessamine and the right coordinates were finally enough to let her put it down. He doesn't know if the crossing mechanism worked. But he remembers the dog's name. He remembers Cincinnati, 1976. He remembers the smell of rain on hot pavement. He keeps all of it in a specific, intact place in his mind, tended and precise, and he has driven past that mile marker in western Kansas 41 times since that January night, and every time the plains are dark and vast and silent, and the road is empty, and the only light for miles is his own. He thinks that's how it should be. He hopes that's how it should be. He's not completely sure, and that uncertainty, that specific, careful, compassionate uncertainty, is the only ghost he carries, and he carries it willingly, and he'll carry it all the way to whatever coordinates are finally right for him. Story 6, The Cargo That Confused. The thing in the trailer had started making sounds around mile marker 411 on I-80, somewhere in the flat black nothing between Elko and Winnemucca, Nevada. Not engine sounds, not the Jake brake shimmy or the reefer unit cycling through its cooling sequence. Something wet, something rhythmic, something that made Robert Hayes grip the steering wheel until the knuckles of both hands went the color of old bone. Robert had been hauling refrigerated freight for 16 years. He knew every sound a rig could make. He knew the protest of a bad fifth-wheel coupling, the specific whine of a wheel bearing going south, the 1,000 different languages his Peterbilt 389 spoke when it was tired or cold or angry. What he heard now wasn't any of those things. It was breathing. The cargo was breathing. He'd picked up the load in Sacramento 3 days earlier. A pharmaceutical company called Meridian Bio had contracted with his carrier for temperature-sensitive transport, which wasn't unusual. The unusual part was the sealed documentation they'd provided, a single laminated sheet of instructions in a red envelope that said in capital letters, "Do not check temperature above 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Do not open trailer doors between stops. Do not, under any circumstances, listen at the trailer walls." He'd laughed at that last one. He'd folded the sheet and tucked it in his sun visor and forgotten about it until now, at 2:47 a.m. on March 14, 2023, when the sound coming through the wall behind his sleeper berth was unmistakably, impossibly lung-generated. Robert told himself it was an animal, a stowaway, a dog that had crawled in at the Sacramento loading dock, something rational and explicable. He told himself this while the breathing grew louder, more deliberate, almost thoughtful in its rhythm. It was inhaling for approximately 4 seconds, pausing for 1, exhaling for 6. In, pause out, he knew that rhythm. It was the breathing pattern his daughter used when she was pretending to be asleep, slow and exaggerated. And the recognition of it here, on a dark interstate in the Nevada desert at 3 in the morning, cracked something open inside his chest. He'd been driving for 19 hours. His logbook would show he was within legal limits because he'd learned early how to make logbooks say whatever needed saying. The coffee in his travel mug had gone cold somewhere around Salt Lake City. His eyes felt packed with sand. None of this explained what he was hearing. Robert pressed the accelerator and watched the speedometer climb past 73. He wanted Winnemucca. He wanted lights and a truck stop and diesel fumes and other drivers who would nod and say nothing because truckers understood the value of silence. He wanted to be surrounded by the mundane evidence that the world was what it appeared to be. The breathing changed. As it was still coming from the trailer, he could feel it more than hear it now, a vibration in the aluminum skin of his rig, a resonance in the metal frame beneath his seat, but the rhythm had shifted. It was faster, agitated, like something that had been dormant and was becoming aware. Robert did what the instructions had told him not to do. He couldn't help it. He pressed his ear against the thin wall separating the sleeper from the trailer space and listened. What came back at him wasn't breathing anymore. It was his names. Not spoken, not vocalized in any way he could explain or defend under examination. More like his name had been arranged inside the sound of the breathing, the way a face sometimes appears in wood grain or water stains, present but requiring the right angle of perception to resolve. Robert. He heard it the way you hear your name called from across a crowded room, that specific frequency of your own identity that cuts through noise. He jerked back from the wall and his elbow caught the CB radio, and the resulting crash of static in the cab was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. He picked up the handset, put it down. Who was he going to call? What was he going to say? He imagined himself on Channel 19 telling some night driver about the breathing in his trailer. He put the handset back in its cradle. The temperature gauge on the reefer unit mounted to the front of the trailer read 33.8 degrees Fahrenheit. He could see it in his passenger mirror, the digital readout glowing amber in the darkness. It had been holding at 33.6 for the past 200 miles. Now it ticked to 33.9, then 34. He remembered the instructions. Do not check temperature above 34 degrees Fahrenheit. He didn't know if the warning was about checking the temperature or about what happened if the temperature exceeded 34 degrees. He wasn't sure it mattered. The gauge read 34.1. Well, the breathing sound stopped. The silence that replaced it was worse. It was the silence of held breath, of something suspending itself in anticipation of a specific moment. Robert had grown up hunting with his father in rural Idaho, and he knew the silence that filled the woods when a large predator moved through it, the way every small creature stopped and waited and tried to be nothing. That was the silence now filling his trailer. Everything in there had gone still because something in there had gone alert. The temperature gauge ticked to 34.3, then 34.6, moving faster now. Robert pulled off the interstate at the next exit, a nameless off-ramp, no services, just a gravel pull-off that the state of Nevada maintained for trucks to check their loads, and stopped the rig with the trailer facing away from the highway toward the desert. He sat with the engine running and the lights on and tried to think clearly. The manifest said he was carrying pharmaceutical samples, 64 canisters of experimental compound, each roughly the size of a thermos, packed in medical-grade dry ice. 64. He'd signed for 64 canisters at the Sacramento loading dock without opening the trailer to count them because you didn't count sealed pharmaceutical loads. You trusted the manifest. You trusted the chain of custody. But now he thought about the fact that the load had been warm when he'd picked it up, unusual, since temperature-sensitive freight was typically pre-chilled, and that the Meridian Bio representative who'd handed him the documentation had worn gloves despite the Sacramento heat, and that there had been no smell of dry ice, no wisps of vapor from the trailer doors when they'd sealed them. Dry ice sublimated. It produced CO2 fog. There had been nothing. He thought about the 64 canisters roughly the size of thermoses, and he thought about all the things that might be roughly thermos-sized, and he thought about the breathing rhythm that sounded like his daughter pretending to sleep, and he decided he wasn't going to open the trailer. He was going to drive to the delivery address in Salt Lake City, drop the trailer at the dock, and never think about this again. That was when the trailer doors opened from the inside. He heard it in his mirrors, the heavy thunk of the crossbar mechanism disengaging, the groan of the hinges as the right side door swung out, and he sat paralyzed for 4 seconds looking at the reflection of his trailer standing open in the Nevada dark. The interior light inside the trailer was not on, which was expected because trailer interiors didn't have lights that activated automatically. But there was illumination. A dim, sourceless phosphorescence, blue-white and steady, the color of old snow or healthy teeth. Robert put the truck in gear. He didn't look back again until he was doing 81 miles an hour on I-80 heading east with the desert wind roaring through the open trailer doors behind him. He watched in his mirrors as whatever the phosphorescence had been illuminating slowly diminished with distance. He never identified what he saw. His brain would not assemble the image into anything with a name, a shape, a posture, something upright in the trailer space, framed by the open doors growing smaller as he drove away from it. He made it to Winnemucca. He parked at a Flying J and sat in his cab with the doors locked for 2 hours and 19 minutes. At 5:08 a.m., he got out and walked to the back of the trailer and looked inside. The 64 canisters, each sealed, each apparently undisturbed. The temperature inside the trailer was 33.9 degrees Fahrenheit and the doors had somehow closed themselves again. Robert drove the load to Salt Lake City. He signed the delivery documents. He drove his empty trailer back to Sacramento and D called his dispatcher and said he needed 2 weeks off. His dispatcher said the company couldn't authorize 2 weeks. Robert quit over the phone, which surprised him because he'd never quit anything in his life. He saw the doctor 3 weeks later. The doctor asked him when the tremors had started. Robert said March 14th. The doctor asked him what had happened on March 14th and Robert said nothing. I had a long night, and the doctor wrote something in his chart that Robert caught a glimpse of upside down. It said, "Patient appears to be experiencing dissociative episode, refer for psych." He didn't go to the psychiatric referral. He went back to driving instead, but only day routes now, never overnight, never refrigerated. He'd been doing it for 8 months when he made the mistake of telling his wife about the trailer, about the breathing, about the shape in the phosphorescent light, and she'd listened in complete silence and then asked if there was something he wasn't telling her. He said there was. He said that before he'd driven away, in the 2 or 3 seconds between the doors opening and him getting the rig moving, he'd smelled something through the cab's ventilation system. Something clinical and sweet, the smell of cold, sterile air mixed with something biological. He'd recognized it immediately and hadn't been able to name it until weeks later, lying awake at 3 a.m. while his wife slept beside him. It was the smell of a hospital maternity ward. The specific combination of antiseptic and something living and new and just beginning. He didn't know what that meant, he still doesn't. But he stopped sleeping in the same room as his wife after that, because whatever he'd smelled in that Nevada dark had made him feel, in some profound and unshakable way, like a threat. Like something that should not be near things that were fragile and new. He sleeps in the garage now. He tells himself it's because of his schedule. He doesn't examine the way he checks the garage ceiling every morning before he opens his eyes all the way, scanning for the blue-white phosphorescence that never appears. He doesn't talk about the 64 canisters. He never looked up Meridian Bio because he was afraid it wouldn't exist, and he was equally afraid that it would. The reefer unit still cycles through its sequence in his nightmares. Always at 34.2 degrees. Always just above threshold. Always right before the sound of something deciding to wake up. Story 7, Mile Marker 0. Patricia Sullivan had been driving the same 40-mile stretch of US-93 in rural Arizona for 6 hours when she finally accepted that she wasn't going forward anymore. The exit signs were wrong. Not vandalized wrong, not misread while tired wrong, architecturally wrong. The sign for Wikioop that should have appeared at the 125-mile marker appeared instead at mile 89. She'd passed it twice before she'd started counting. Patricia drove for a woman-owned fleet out of Phoenix, and she was good at it, methodical. She kept meticulous handwritten logs in the notebook she carried in her door pocket, updating every 15 minutes with her position, speed, and fuel level. She'd started the practice after a navigation system failure had left her stranded outside of Flagstaff in 2019, and she'd never stopped. The notebook was her ground truth when everything else lied. The notebook was lying. At 11:15 p.m. on November 7th, 2022, she'd written, US 93 mile 127, 61 mph, fuel 34. At 11:30 p.m. she'd written, US 93 mile 89, 57 mph, fuel 34. Same fuel level. 15 minutes of driving at highway speed, and she'd gone backward 38 miles without noticing the transition. As she'd been moving, the engine was running, the road was passing under her tires, the landscape was scrolling past her windows. But she'd been moving on a loop she couldn't see the edge of. She pulled over at a gravel shoulder and got out of the cab. The desert night was absolute in the way that desert nights are absolute: no light pollution, no ambient glow, stars pressing down from an ink-dark sky with the weight of their own antiquity. She could see for miles in every direction. The road ran north and south, straight and flat, visible as a gray stripe until it vanished at the horizon. She saw no other vehicles. She heard no other engines. She was alone in a specific and particular way that she'd never experienced in 16 years of night driving, a quality of aloneness that felt deliberate. Her cell phone showed no service. She'd expected that this stretch of US 93 was notoriously dead, but what she hadn't expected was the phone's clock. It read 11:14 p.m. She'd written 11:15 in her logbook 30 seconds ago. The phone's clock was moving backward at approximately the same rate she discovered she was moving backward, 1 minute behind, 1 minute lost. She got back in the cab and drove north. Fast, 78 miles an hour, watching the mile markers tick past in. The headlights 89, 90, 91, 92, climbing. She breathed normally until mile marker 127, at which point she exhaled so hard her vision sparked because she was past where she'd started. She was in new territory. She was moving forward through time and space in the direction she'd intended. Then the road curved left in a way that didn't match her memory of US 93, and she crested a shallow rise and saw mile marker 89 in her headlights. Patricia did not stop this time. She drove straight through mile 89 without slowing, watching the numbers climb, 90, 91, 92, making it to 127 again, making it to 130, heart hammering. Hands steady because her hands were always steady. It was the thing she was most proud of: 19 years of truck driving, and she'd never had a hands problem. She got to mile 140, and the road bent left again, and the marker in her headlights read 89s. And she understood then that there were only two possibilities. Either she was experiencing some form of medical crisis, stroke, psychotic break, seizure, or the road itself was structured differently than it appeared. She was a practical woman. She evaluated both possibilities evenly. Her speech was clear. Her vision was unimpaired. Her coordination was normal. She'd tested it by walking heel-to-toe on the gravel shoulder during her stop. Against her will, she found herself giving more weight to the second possibility. Patricia pulled her CB handset and called on Channel 19. She said she was stuck on US 93 between Wickiup and nothing and asked if anyone could come out to her position. The CB emitted the specific hiss of a dead channel, no carriers, no one out there. She switched to channel 9, the emergency frequency. Same silence. She ran through every channel in sequence, all silent. Then channel 19 came alive. Not with another trucker, with her own voice. She heard herself say, "I'm stuck on US 93 between Wickiup and nothing," and asked if anyone could come out to my position. She'd said those words. She recognized the exact cadence, the dryness in her voice that always appeared when she was frightened but unwilling to show it. Her own transmission was being played back to her on a 10-second delay. Or perhaps it wasn't a delay. Perhaps there was another Patricia Sullivan somewhere on this loop who'd made this call 38 miles behind her, or in front of her, or some direction that didn't have a name in ordinary geometry. She drove south this time, against traffic. The wrong direction. She told herself that if the loop was a circle or something like a circle, reversing would break the pattern. It didn't work. She passed mile marker 89 in the wrong direction, watching the numbers descend, 88, 87, 86. New territory. She felt a gust of hope that tightened into nausea when the road curved at mile 72 and brought her face to face with her own headlights, her own rig coming toward her from the south. And she hit the brakes, and the other truck hit its brakes, and they sat there on the road pointing at each other with 6 feet of asphalt between their front bumpers. Patricia had time to think, that's my rig. Same livery, same mud pattern on the hood, same crack in the driver's side headlight casing that she'd been meaning to get fixed. She had time to think this before the driver's door of the other truck opened and a woman got out. The woman was Patricia. Same work jacket, same hair, same height and specific way of standing with her weight slightly on the left foot. The other Patricia was looking at her with an expression that Patricia recognized as the face she made when she was trying to appear calmer than she was. They stood 30 feet apart in the headlights of their identical trucks and said nothing for what felt like a very long time. Then the other Patricia said, "How long have you been in here?" Patricia said, 6 hours. The other one shook her head slowly. She said, "I've been in here for 4 days, and there are 17 of us now." Patricia drove north. She didn't look back. She was moving faster than she'd ever driven, 86 miles an hour, watching the mile markers with the intensity of someone looking for a lifeline. She was counting something else now, the vehicles. She started seeing them at mile 102, trucks parked on the shoulder, some with lights on, some dark, their drivers standing outside or visible in the windows, all of them watching her pass. She counted 11 before she made the turn at 127 and found herself at 89 again. 17, the other Patricia had said 17. Patricia counted the trucks on her next loop, 13. On the loop after that, 15s. On the loop after that, 11s. The numbers weren't climbing, they were fluctuating, which meant the others were finding their way out or were disappearing for some other reason. She decided not to think about what other reason meant. She tried something new. At mile marker 100, exactly in the middle of the loop, she stopped the truck, turned off the engine, got out an had on the hood and looked at the sky. She stayed there for what her phone told her was 47 minutes, though the phone's time had stopped being reliable an hour ago. She looked at the stars. They were wrong. Not dramatically, not a completely alien sky, but there were 7 more stars in the constellation she'd always called the ladle than there should have been. 7 extra points of light that made no sense in terms of any constellation she knew. She was not in the same place she'd started. She was in something adjacent to that place. Something that shared its roads and its mile markers but disagreed about the stars. Patricia drove on. She stopped counting the trucks. She stopped checking the phone. She focused on the road and on her breathing and on the basic mechanical task of keeping a 40-foot trailer tracking straight at speed. She thought about her daughter, who was 12 and currently staying with Patricia's mother while Patricia finished this run. She thought about the specific way her daughter said goodbye, always at least twice, always with the second one louder than the first, like punctuation. She was thinking about this when the road stopped looping. She didn't notice immediately. She was past mile 160 before she registered that the mile markers were climbing without interruption, and she nearly missed the sign for Wiki-Yoop, real Wiki-Yoop. She was certain, though she couldn't have said why, and she pulled over and sat with the engine idling for 11 minutes before she trusted herself to drive again. She arrived at her delivery destination in Kingman, Arizona at 4:23 a.m., which was 5 hours and 17 minutes later than her scheduled arrival. She told her dispatcher her navigation had failed and she'd gotten turned around on unfamiliar highway. The dispatcher docked her pay for the delay without much concern. Patricia filed an incident report with the company, which required her to describe the malfunction in specific terms. She described the navigation failure. She did not describe the other trucks on the shoulder. She did not describe the other version of herself standing in the headlights. She runs the same US-93 route twice monthly. She drives it in daylight now always, and she counts the mile markers every time. She's never gotten stuck again. But she's seen 3 times in 11 months a truck parked on the shoulder at mile 100 with no driver visible and its engine running and its headlights pointing at the desert. She doesn't stop. She doesn't call it in. She always speeds up through that stretch. She keeps her eyes on the road ahead. On her phone, she has the photo she took in the headlights, the night she broke free. A woman standing in the road in a work jacket, same hair, same height, same crack in the headlight casing on the truck behind her. Patricia keeps it not as proof of anything but as a reminder of a specific terror, the terror of encountering yourself somewhere you shouldn't be, and understanding from the look on your own face that you've been there much, much longer than you know. The photo's timestamp reads November 3rd. Patricia's logs say November 7th. The 4-day discrepancy is something she does not investigate. She suspects the answer would be the kind of thing she couldn't carry while also carrying everything else she has to carry. She suspects the other Patricia is still driving that loop. She suspects they're all still driving that loop, the 17 of them, counting mile markers in the Arizona dark. She doesn't know what she suspects about the extra stars. Some questions, she's learned, are not meant to be answered by people who still need to drive home. So Story 8: What the Diner Wanted. Marcus Chen had eaten the eggs before he understood they weren't eggs. He'd eaten half the plate scrambled with cheese side of toast, and he was reaching for his coffee when the cook behind the counter said without turning around, "How are they?" And Marcus had started to say fine habit reflex, the standard response to the standard diner question, and then he tasted them again in memory and the word fine stopped in his throat. He'd been driving I-40 east through New Mexico when he'd seen the lights. Not the highway lights. There weren't any on this stretch outside of Tucumcari. These were the lights of a diner he'd never seen before and had no reason to trust. A low aluminum-sided building sitting 40 feet off the highway with a gravel lot and a red neon sign that said "Eat," and a parking area with 2 other 18-wheelers and a pickup truck. He'd been awake for too many hours and hungry in the specific way that came from too much coffee on an empty stomach, and the other rigs in the lot had been the deciding factor. If other drivers were eating here, it was safe. He'd been driving overnight freight for 11 years. He was 38 years old, single, based out of Albuquerque. He drove because he was good at it and because the particular saw it. The ute of a highway cab suited something in his temperament, a need for prolonged, purposeful silence, a comfort with being in motion while the rest of the world was still. He was not a superstitious man. He was not, by nature, afraid of things. The cook had still not turned around when Marcus asked what the eggs were made from. The question came out flat and calm because Marcus was flat and calm. This was a skill he'd developed over 11 years of being the only person awake in enormous darkness and needing to make decisions clearly. He was calm when he asked, and he was calm when the cook's shoulders stiffened in the particular way of someone who'd been caught at something, and he was calm when the cook said very quietly, "You weren't supposed to notice." Marcus stood up from the counter stool. He did it slowly. He picked up his coffee mug and set it down on the counter away from him because he didn't know what was in the coffee either. He looked at the two other truckers at the far end of the diner. They were eating, both looking at their plates, not talking, not looking at each other, not looking at Marcus. There was something wrong with the quality of their attention, a flatness, a directed focus that reminded him of watching animals that had recently been sedated. He looked at the menu on the wall behind the cook. He'd ordered from it 20 minutes ago without thinking: egg plate, 3 eggs, cheese, toast, HASHBROWNS, $6.99, and it had seemed normal then. Now he read the fine print at the bottom of the menu. Diners didn't usually have fine print, but this menu did, small type running in a footer along the bottom edge of the laminated board. By accepting service at this establishment, guests acknowledge standard hospitality exchange terms. Providers retain right of reciprocal claim upon departure. Marcus read this 3 times. The cook turned around. The cook was a man of about 60 with a white apron and a face that was completely ordinary in every feature except for the eyes, which were the problem. The eyes were wrong in a way that Marcus couldn't specify precisely, like a photograph where every element is technically correct but the overall image produces profound wrongness. The eyes tracked Marcus with mechanical precision, no drift, no saccade, no normal human micro-movement. They were measuring him. Well, the cook said, "Your colleagues accepted terms. It goes easier when you accept terms." Marcus said, "What terms?" Well, the cook gestured at the 2 truckers eating silently at the far end of the counter. He said, 3 days of service, in return for the meal and rest. Marcus said, "Service doing what?" Well, the cook said, "Driving." Marcus was already moving. He'd keyed his truck running before he'd come inside a force of habit in a lot with no overhead lights, and the distance to the door was approximately 20 feet through tables he'd have to navigate. He assessed this in the way he'd learned to assess clearances on tight delivery docks, automatic and fast, and he went through the diner in 8 steps without touching a chair. The door opened before he reached it. Not because someone opened it from outside. It opened because the diner opened it. He didn't know how he knew this, but he knew it the same way he'd known the eggs were wrong before his brain caught up with his gut, some register of perception below language, below analysis. The building opened its door and the night came in and Marcus went through it and didn't look back. He made his truck in 4 seconds and had it moving before the door was fully closed. Gravel under tires. The lot behind him in the mirrors. He expected someone to follow. No one followed. As he got onto I-40 and drove east with the windows down because the night air was cold and he needed cold. He needed to be uncomfortable and awake. He needed to think about what had been in the eggs because he'd eaten half a plate and something was already in his system, and he needed to know what it was doing. The first thing it did was visible at mile marker 337, approximately 30 miles east of the diner. His side mirrors began showing him the wrong landscape. Not dramatically, not obviously, just a slight lag in what appeared in the reflection, as if the mirrors were showing him where he'd been 3 seconds ago rather than where he was now. This was spatially impossible. He knew it was spatially impossible. He watched it happen anyway. The second thing was the voice. Not from the CB, not from any speaker, from his own head, from some space behind his eyes where he'd never had a voice before. It said, in a register that wasn't quite sound and wasn't quite thought, "You can't go fast enough." The terms follow. Marcus did not slow down. He drove at 79 miles an hour and called his dispatcher on the satellite phone because his cell signal was gone and had been gone since the diner and he needed contact with something real. The dispatcher picked up on the third ring, groggy and confused because it was 3 a.m. and Marcus said he needed to report a dangerous establishment at his last rest stop and give the location. The dispatcher asked for coordinates. Marcus gave the GPS coordinates from his navigation system. The dispatcher said, "That's a road mile. There's nothing there. I'm looking at the map right now and there's nothing at those coordinates." Marcus drove. The voice in his head said, in the measured tone of something accustomed to waiting, "3 days is very short. We've had drivers stay much longer." He stopped at a rest area outside Amarillo and stayed in his cab until sunrise. He was sick twice in the hours between 3 and 6 a.m., not severely, not dangerously, but with a quality of purposeful expulsion, like his body was trying to excise something with a personality. By 6:20, the nausea was gone. His vision was normal. His mirrors were showing him real-time reality again. He drove the rest of his run in the full Texas daylight and delivered his freight in Dallas on schedule and checked into a motel and slept for 14 hours. In the morning, he called the New Mexico State Troopers and described the diner and its location. The trooper who took his report was polite and thorough. 2 days later, a different trooper called back and said there was no structure at or near those coordinates, no registered food service establishment, no record of the location in state business registries. The trooper asked if Marcus had been experiencing fatigue-related hallucinations. Marcus said no and thanked the trooper and ended the call. He drove I-40 3 weeks later. He watched for the diner. He found the gravel lot. The tire track impression was still there in the dried mud, but the diner was gone, not demolished, not boarded up. Simply absent. The ground where it had stood showed no foundation, no utilities, no evidence of construction. Just flat New Mexico ground with the ghost impression of where a gravel lot had been. One of the 2 other truckers from that night contacted his company's safety line 4 months after Marcus's incident. Marcus heard about it secondhand from his dispatcher, who mentioned it without connecting it to Marcus's previous complaint. The trucker, Marcus never learned his name, had lost approximately 72 hours after visiting an unnamed roadside diner on I-40. He'd come to consciousness in his truck cab somewhere in Oklahoma with a full tank of diesel, a completed logbook he didn't remember writing, and a meal receipt in his shirt pocket for an establishment called Eat, signed by himself, dated 3 days after the night he remembered entering the building. The receipt his dispatcher had mentioned was for 3 eggs, cheese, and toast. The tip line had been left blank. In the space where you wrote the tip, in handwriting that was apparently his but that the trucker said he didn't recognize as his, someone had written, "Paid in full, service rendered." Marcus hasn't eaten eggs since November. He doesn't drive I-40 at night anymore. He tells himself this is a scheduling preference and most days he believes it. When he doesn't believe it, when he's lying awake at 2 a.m. turning over the specific wrongness of the cook's eyes or the fine print on the menu or the voice that said you can't go fast enough, he thinks about the second trucker from that counter. He thinks about the 72 hours. He thinks about whatever the diner wanted them for. What 3 days of service meant in the economy of something that served eggs that weren't eggs and claimed drivers like a toll. He thinks about the other truck in that lot, the pickup, not the semis, not a commercial driver, a civilian, someone who might not have had the 11 years of dark road survival sense that told Marcus to run. He thinks about that civilian a lot. He never found a report that fit. He never found evidence that a person matching that vehicle went missing in New Mexico around that date. He finds this neither reassuring nor conclusive. He finds it the particular kind of disturbing that lives below resolution, that can't be closed or filed, that sits at the back of his awareness like a door left open in a house where you've confirmed you're alone. He knows the diner is still out there. It has to be. It found a spot on I-40 once and it will find a spot again. Different mile marker, same gravel lot, same neon sign that just says eat, because eat is the only word it needs, because hungry people stop for it reflexively, because the hunger the road creates is something the diner understands better than any of its customers. He knows this because the voice hasn't entirely stopped. It's quiet, nearly inaudible most days, but it's there. It says very little now, just occasional fragments like bad radio reception, like something checking in from a distance to confirm that he's still accounted for, still on the ledger, still one of the ones that got away but is not yet forgotten. The most recent thing it said as 11 days ago at 2:40 in the morning on a rest stop outside of Albuquerque. He'd been awake for no reason, staring at his bunk ceiling in the darkness, and the voice in the space behind his eyes had said, "Almost time for your return visit." He moved his home base to Denver last week. He filed the transfer before he'd fully consciously decided to do it. His dispatcher asked why, and he said he needed a change of scenery. Well, he's still waiting to find out if that's enough. Story 9, The Man in MY Mirrors. Delilah Voss first saw the man in her passenger mirror at mile marker 88 on I-70 in Kansas, and by mile marker 210 she'd established 3 facts. He wasn't gaining on her, he wasn't falling behind, and he was driving a truck that looked exactly like hers. She'd been running solo eastbound out of Denver, empty trailer, deadheading back to Kansas City after a delivery. October 19th, 2021, a Tuesday with a cloud ceiling at about 200 feet and rain that had been threatening since Sterling. The highway was nearly empty. The weather had pulled most traffic off, and she'd been doing 72 in the right lane with the radio tuned to a country station out of Salina that kept fading to static and coming back. Delilah had driven this run 417 times. She knew it the way she knew her own apartment, the exact curve of it, the quirks, the mile markers that felt like landmarks. She knew where the road rose and where it flattened. She knew where the cell signal died and where it came back. She was 31 years old and she'd started driving at 19 with a company that had since folded, and she'd never had an accident, never had a ticket, never had a situation she couldn't manage. The man in the mirror was 200 yards back, matching her speed precisely. She adjusted her cruise control to 68. He matched her within 5 seconds. She bumped it to 75. He matched her. She could see his truck clearly in the mirror, a Kenworth T680 in white, same as hers, with what appeared to be the same red stripe on the door panel that she'd had applied at a custom shop in Denver. The same stripe. And she told herself white Kenworths are common. Red stripes exist on other trucks. She slowed to 55 miles an hour on a highway with a 75 limit and watched the man in the mirror hold 200 yards for 6 miles without wavering. At a fixed following distance, a vehicle trailing at 55 should either close the gap or, if the following driver also slowed, show some latency, some normal human reaction time. This one showed none. He matched her instantly, every time. Delilah picked up her CB. She keyed the handset on channel 19 and said to no one in particular that she was eastbound on I-70 and there was a white Kenworth staying on her 6 that she'd appreciate identifying itself. The CB produced its characteristic hiss. Then a man's voice said, "I'm right behind you, Delilah." She had not given her name on the CB. She had said eastbound I-70 white Kenworth. She had not said Delilah. She asked how he knew her names. There was a pause, the kind of pause that felt structured rather than caused by transmission delay. Then the voice said, "I've been watching you for a long time. You always do the return run on Tuesdays. You always stop at the Phillips 66 in Colby. You always order the chicken sandwich, but you don't eat the bottom half of the bun." Delilah's hands did not shake. They didn't shake because she had trained them over 12 years to do what she told them regardless of what was happening in the rest of her body. Her stomach was doing something bad and complex, but her hands were steady. She said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm you, one version of you, the one that made different choices." She had heard versions of this line before. Every driver heard versions of strange transmissions, drunk truckers, teenagers with CBs, people who thought highway radio was a good medium for performance art. She would have written this off the same way she'd written off all of it, except that the man in the mirror at that precise moment pulled his truck from 200 yards back to 100 yards in a surge of acceleration that matched her speed exactly. She could see him more clearly now. She could see the red stripe on the door. She could see the figure in the driver's seat. She couldn't resolve the face. The cab windows on the trailing truck had a quality to them that her eyes refused to stick to, like trying to focus on something in peripheral vision that dissolves when you look directly at it. She took the next exit. Not a service exit, a county road exit, gravel leading to nothing she could see. She took it at 60 miles an hour and felt the trailer swing and corrected with the automatic precision of 12 years of muscle memory. She watched in her mirror as the white Kenworth took the same exit. He didn't brake for it the way she had, he took it at the same speed she'd been doing on the highway, as if the exit had simply materialized at the right moment for him, as if physics were extending a courtesy. They sat on the county road for 40 seconds, her truck and his, nose to tail, both idling. The rain had started in earnest now, drumming on her roof, isolating her in a capsule of noise and light. The man in the mirror had stopped 40 feet behind her. Then his door opened. She drove forward down the county road because going back meant passing him, and she wasn't going to do that. The county road was 2 lanes and gravel, and she was running her trailer sideways on it, overcorrecting in the mud, but she was moving. She watched him in the mirror. He'd gotten out of his truck and was standing next to it in the rain, watching her go. She could see his outline, same build as her, roughly same height, dressed in something dark. He wasn't pursuing, he was just watching. Then he was in her passenger seat. Delilah Voss did not scream. She made a sound that wasn't a scream, involuntary, low, the sound of her body processing something her mind hadn't caught up with yet. The man was in her passenger seat. He had not opened her door. Her door was locked. Her cab was in motion. He was simply present in the space adjacent to her, turned toward her, and she could see his face now that he was close. Her face, or something close enough to her face that the difference was the thing that made it terrible. Her features, her age, her specific way of holding the jaw slightly forward when concentrating. But wrong in the way a reflection can be wrong, reversed in some axis that wasn't spatial, off in some quality that made every familiar feature into a denial of familiarity. Well, he said, I'm trying to show you something. You need to understand what you're becoming. And Delilah said, and she would be proud of this for the rest of her life, she said. Get out of my truck. Well, he said, in 4 years you will make a decision on this highway. I came to show you what happens after. She said, I don't want to know. Oh, he said, that's what I said. She drove the county road until it met another road, a paved one, and took that north and kept taking roads, any road that ran counter to his presence, until the lights of a town appeared and she drove toward them without caring what town they were. She stopped at the first lit building she could reach, a 24-hour farm supply store, and she sat in her truck with every light on. The passenger seat was empty. It had been empty since about the time she'd found the paved road. She'd been too focused on driving to notice exactly when the transition happened. She called her mother. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, and her mother answered on the second ring the way she always had since Delilah's father had died, not because she was expecting bad news, but because she was always ready for it. Delilah talked for 37 minutes. She did not tell her mother about the man in the truck. She talked about other things, her route, a restaurant she'd eaten at in Denver, a movie she'd been meaning to watch. She talked until her voice was steady and her breathing was even, and the farm supply store's fluorescent lights had normalized into ordinary light. She drives I-70 Tuesdays. She still stops at the Colby Phillips 66. She does not order the chicken sandwich anymore. She doesn't know if this is defiance or supplication or just the mechanical result of not being hungry for chicken anymore. 4 years, in her mind she counts backward and forward from October 2021. She'll hit the 4-year mark in October 2025. She doesn't know what decision she'll face. She's tried to imagine it from every angle and gets nowhere. Too many variables, too many branching points, a 12-year career producing a fractal of possible turning points. What she knows is that the man in her mirror saw it, saw what happened after, and he'd come back across whatever distance separated his choice from hers to show her, and she'd told him no. She wonders if that was the right answer. She wonders if the version of herself that hadn't said no looks at that moment the same way as the decision that determined everything, as the branch point where the road forked. She wonders if saying yes would have made her one of the drivers on the dark highway, following someone from a future they couldn't choose, watching a version of themselves drive away into the rain. Her mirrors are never entirely comfortable now. She checks them, she has to check them, it's safety, it's the job, but there's always a half-second of held breath before the image resolves. She's looking for the white Kenworth. She's looking for the red stripe. She's looking for the face she knows too well to ever mistake for a stranger's. She hasn't seen him since. This does not comfort her. It means the 4 years haven't elapsed yet. It means whatever decision she's driving toward, she hasn't reached it. Every Tuesday she takes the Denver to Kansas City run. Every Tuesday she passes mile marker 88 and she slows to 55, and she watches her mirror for 200 yards of following distance that doesn't waver. Every Tuesday so far there's nothing there. So far. Story 10, the wait station at the end. The way station had been closed when James Ackaffer pulled off I-75 into its inspection bay at 1:13 a.m. on February 8, 2024. The closed sign was illuminated. The booth was dark. He knew it was closed. He pulled in anyway because his eyes had done something strange, a visual skip, like a film reel missing a frame, and he'd wanted off the highway for a moment to confirm he was all right. He confirmed he wasn't all right when he tried to pull back onto the highway and found that the exit of the way station no longer connected to anything. He sat in the inspection bay with his engine idling and looked at the road. The road existed. He could see I-75 through the way station's exit lane, the reflectors ticking past as vehicles drove north, the glow of approaching headlights and the diminishing red of taillights. The road was there, but the connection between where he sat and where the road was had been severed in some way he couldn't visually isolate. He could see the merge lane. He could see it ended where he needed it to start. There was a gap of approximately 8 feet of asphalt between the end of his exit lane and the beginning of the merge lane that simply had no existence. Not a barrier, not a drop, not darkness or void. Just the termination of the exit lane and the beginning of the merge lane with nothing mediating between them. James Ackaffer was 44 years old and had been driving commercial freight for 22 years. He was a methodical, deliberate man who had driven through 3 hurricanes, 2 blizzards, and 1 wildfire evacuation. He had driven for 31 consecutive hours once in 2017 when a cross-country pharmaceutical run had suffered 3 consecutive equipment failures. And he'd held himself together through all of it with black coffee, mathematics, and what his wife called his gift for treating impossible situations like logistics problems. He employed this gift now. The logistics problem was, there are 8 feet of nothing between me and the highway. The solution options, turn around and look for another exit, wait for the gap to close, find the source of the problem. Well, he got out of the truck. The way station inspection bay was standard, concrete overhead lights, the kind of facility that looked precisely like itself and no other thing, scales embedded in the concrete. The booth to his left dark, its equipment powered down. The closed sign above, which he could now see, was glowing not because it was illuminated from within, but because it was reflecting light from somewhere he couldn't source. The light was coming from the direction of the gap. James walked to the gap and looked at it. From close up, it had a texture he hadn't expected, not a clean termination of road surfaces, but a gradual diminishment. The concrete of the exit lane becoming slightly less concrete as it approached the edge, as if the material itself was attenuating. He crouched and put his hand near it without touching it and felt nothing unusual. He picked up a piece of gravel from the lane's edge and tossed it across. The gravel crossed without incident. It landed on the merge lane and skittered to a stop and lay there being gravel. The gap didn't react. The gravel passed through fines. James walked back to his truck. He found someone in the driver's seat. He stood outside the driver's door for a moment, looking through the window at the figure inside. The cab light was off, but the ambient illumination from the reflected closed sign was enough. A person in the driver's seat, his size, sitting in his posture, hands on his wheel. The figure turned its head and looked at him through the window. It had his face. Or it had the place where his face was in the way that a shadow has the place where a body is. He opened the passenger door and climbed in. He was not going to be intimidated out of his own truck by something with no more substance than a shadow wearing his shape. He sat in the passenger seat and looked at the thing in the driver's seat and said, "What is this place?" Well, the thing with his face said, "This is the last way station. Everybody stops here eventually." James said, "I'm not everybody and I'm not stopped. I pulled off for 2 minutes." The thing said, "Everybody says that." It gestured at the closed booth. "There's a record here. Every driver, their last trip, what they were carrying, where they were going, how they went." James said, "How they went." Well, the thing nodded. It said, "Accidents, medical events. A few just stopped and didn't start again. The record keeps them. The station stays open because the record isn't finished." James thought about the 22 years of roads and the number of drivers he'd known personally who hadn't made it. A man named Dennis who'd fallen asleep on I-90 in 2009. A woman named Carol who'd had a cardiac event outside of Memphis in 2016. He thought about them and thought about them being recorded somewhere, their last trips logged at some terminal way station that kept its records in the substance of its concrete and its closed booth. Well, he said, "Am I dead?" The thing said, "No, you drove in wrong. Most people arrive from the other direction." James said, "What other direction?" The thing with his face turned and looked at the gap between the exit lane and the highway. It said, "From there." James looked at the gap. From the inside of the truck it looked different, not a gap but a seam, the place where two conditions of existence joined imperfectly. He could see through it to the highway, to the trucks passing north, and he understood that they couldn't see the way station. He understood that the way station was present on I-75, the way a door is present in a wall, only apparent to those approaching from the correct side, only accessible when you were at the right angle of passage. Well, he said, "Then let me go back." Well, the thing said, "Look at your logbook first, bottom of the last page." James reached into his door pocket and pulled his logbook. He turned to the last filled page and looked at the bottom. There was an entry he hadn't written. His handwriting, his pen color, the specific way he formed his numbers, but he hadn't written it. The entry was dated 4 months in the future, June 4th, 2024, and it said, I-75 southbound, mile 301, 4:47 a.m., last entry. And beneath that, in smaller writing that was not his handwriting, cause fell asleep. Load refrigerated produce. Destination not reached. He stared at the entry for a long time. The thing in his driver's seat said nothing. James closed the logbook. He put it back in his door pocket. He climbed out of the passenger door and walked around to the driver's side and opened the door. The seat was empty. Whatever had been sitting there was gone with the absence of drama, as if it had simply fulfilled its function and dissolved. He climbed in and put the truck in reverse and backed up and then drove forward to the gap. He didn't stop. He drove through the 8 feet of nothing at 5 miles an hour and felt nothing, no impact, no transition, no resistance, and he was on the merge lane and then on I-75 northbound, and the way station was behind him and dark and closed and becoming smaller in his mirrors. He drove to the next truck stop and spent 45 minutes in the parking lot writing in the back pages of his logbook, not the official log pages. The blank pages at the back that every driver used for notes and calculations and things they needed to remember. He wrote down the date of the entry that hadn't been his. He wrote down everything the thing in his driver's seat had said. He wrote it in small, precise letters and then tore the pages out and put them in his wallet. Well, he went home. He told his wife he wanted to take 2 weeks off in June. She asked why, and he said he had a feeling. She was used to his failings. She said okay. As he spent the week of June 2nd through June 8th at home, he watched his wife do her garden. He played cards with his youngest daughter, who was 7 and had recently learned war and wanted to play it constantly. He drove nowhere. On June 4th, he called a friend who drove I-75 and asked about road conditions. The friend said it was fine, clear weather, light traffic. At 4:47 a.m. on June 4th, James was asleep in his own bed. He went back to driving on June 9th. He filed for a route change in September and moved to the I-10 corridor, Houston to Jacksonville. He told his dispatcher he wanted a change of scenery. His dispatcher approved it without questions. He kept the torn pages in his wallet for 18 months. On a Monday evening in August 2025, he took them out and unfolded them and read them again. All his small, precise notes about the closed way station and the thing with his face and the entry he hadn't written. He read them twice and then burned them in his kitchen sink and washed the ash down the drain. He thought about what the thing had said. The record keeps them. The station stays open because the record isn't finished. He thought about Dennis, who'd fallen asleep in 2009. He thought about Carol, her cardiac event in 2016. He thought about all the entries in that record, all the last trips, all the destinations not reached. He thought about the fact that he'd driven in wrong from the living side rather than the other and had been given something because of it. A date, a warning, a 4-month notice that let him make a different choice. He thought about why. Why would a station that recorded endings offer a preview to someone still driving? He'd come up with one answer that fit, and it lived in him like a stone in a shoe, present, not debilitating, but impossible to foe. The record wasn't finished. The station needed another entry, and in some economy of fatality that he didn't fully understand, showing him the date of his had bought the station something that justified the intervention. He'd changed his route. He'd moved to I-10. And somewhere, some other driver on I-75 southbound on June 4th had an uneventful 4:47 a.m. Laura hadn't. He doesn't let himself think about the second possibility too long. He keeps driving. He keeps his logbooks in perfect order. He checks his eyes before every run and sleeps 8 hours minimum and eats before he drives and does everything the safety training says. He does not drive I-75. The blank pages at the back of his current logbook are empty. He's left them empty on purpose. He doesn't know what he's waiting for. He doesn't know if another date will appear in handwriting that's his but isn't his, another entry made by something that has access to the record and occasionally, for reasons of its own, permits the living a glimpse of what it contains. He drives I-10 in the dark. He watches for way stations. When he sees one closed, he doesn't pull in. He doesn't look at the booth. He doesn't look at what might be standing in the inspection bay watching him pass. He keeps his eyes on the road and his hands on the wheel, and he drives the way he has for 22 years, the way he will continue to drive until he can't. Which is what all drivers do. Which is, he suspects, exactly what the station is counting on.